into a couple of technical little things here. I'm turning my computer on. Okay. This doesn't seem to be so simple. Okay. All right. Just hate this when you. You're in there. Anyway, hello everyone. I'm completely delighted to be here talking to you today about NOVA. There's a lot to say in very limited time, so I've decided to use this talk to give you a basic introduction to our series, our educational mission, and how we've handled that mother of all controversies between scientists and the American public, evolution. NOVA is currently in its 40th season. That's an eternity in television. It's longer than Seinfeld. It's longer than Seinfeld, I Love Lucy, and Friends. Although General Hospital still has a few years on it. It's been running for 44 years. NOVA is the only documentary series on American television dedicated to telling important science stories week in and week out about 49 weeks a year. We make about 20 new shows a year, and we're supported by corporate funders, foundations, individuals, PBS, and viewers like you. Thank you. NOVA began in 1973, started by a visionary named Michael Ambrosino. At that time, broadcasting in the US had virtually no science programs, and most broadcasters believed that science would not sell. But Michael knew that the BBC had many successful science shows in its lineup, and he went to the UK to study how they did it. He came back convinced that the BBC experience could be repeated here, and began NOVA based on the BBC series Horizon. And as they say, the rest is history. Now, since Michael started NOVA and hired me, the television industry has totally changed. The advent of cable and satellite television has created 400 channels instead of 4. But one thing has not changed. It's all about ratings. The networks have never been into science. Even the great Walter Cronkite, who loved science, was denied the opportunity to host a science show when CBS canceled his Universe series after a single season. Aside from PBS, most science coverage has been found on commercial cable. And both Discovery and the National Geographic Channel have made some distinguished science programs, and still do occasionally. But recently, they seem more engaged in a race to the bottom, with reality programming focused on males 18 to 49 that shows men engaged in such manly activity as shooting alligators in swamps, chopping down trees, driving on icy roads, searching for gold, jousting, and preparing for the end of civilization. For women, the focus is just as weird. Extreme couponing, hoarders, and my personal favorite, toddlers and tiaras. A series focusing on mothers who enter their young daughters in beauty pageants beginning at age 2 or 3. So you can imagine my shock one evening as I was preparing to go to dinner in Los Angeles, hearing Anderson Cooper on his CNN Ridiculous comparing toddlers and tiaras to NOVA. Just as jaw-dropping, he said, but without all that pesky science. Now, we all have our guilty pleasures, and I myself have been known on these long, cold nights here in Boston to tune in to our new cultural icon, Honey Boo Boo, on TLC, formerly known as the Learning Channel. But all this showcases the distinctive nature of PBS and NOVA. Alone among American broadcasters, we aim not only to be entertaining, but educational. Now, to do either of those alone is not very difficult. Research tells us that topic is what attracts viewers. So to achieve high ratings, all we have to do is focus on perennial favorites. For example, what I call weather porn, natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes, or other topics in a category I refer to by the acronym TRSH, or Transparent Rating-Seeking Hype. But we have an educational mission and a commitment to genuine science content. So by way of introduction, let me play you what we call our mission reel so you can get a sense of the scope of what we do.
In 1957, the Soviet Union beat us into space by launching a satellite known as Sputnik. And that was a wake-up call that caused the United States to boost our investment in innovation, particularly in math and science. 50 years later, our generation's Sputnik moment is back. This is our moment.
Freedom Tower is going to be state-of-the-art for many, many years to come.
The biggest earthquakes are apparent of many, many thousands of nuclear bombs.
It changes the paradigm in which we work with computers. That's the vision.
It's not the genes you have, but how you use them that generates the great diversity of the animal kingdom.
This is the hardest job I've ever been on in my life.
They're a remarkable place and an opportunity to start a clean energy revolution.
Keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope. And pray. Okay.
Alright, we are into high electrification in the animal.
Still getting a few precipitation particles through the air.
Are we alone? I think it's the grandest of all scientific questions.
This will be the most exciting adventure we've ever undertaken in Mars.
We are in our flight. Stack ready, sir.
Tango Delta nominal.
Touchdown confirmed. Receive.
Model gravity events unfold in reverse order. According to the laws of physics, this can happen.
If time isn't what we all think it is, then what is it? Did it have a beginning? Will it have an end? Where did it come from?
Every bone that came out of the ground was something brand new to science. It was really amazing.
We see the launching of the career that led to Homo sapiens.
I became deeply interested in understanding who are you in this world? What is the nature of my experience?
And this must be hydrogen.
For the Starsky and Hutch of science nerds.
I don't think you have enough aluminum foil on stuff.
We are seeing actual atoms. Isn't this a historic technological achievement?
Venus is so hot, it'll cook a 16-inch pepperoni pizza out on the windowsill in 9 seconds. We still don't know the origin of life. We wonder if life was once on Mars.
Isn't the trouble with your job the not knowing?
That is not the trouble, that is the seduction.
The payoffs have been huge. I mean, we see something nobody's ever seen before. And the planet Earth deserves to know that.
Look at this! Let's get moving.
There's never been a more important time to showcase the importance of science, technology, and engineering. In 2009, more than half of all U.S. patents went to foreign companies. Even with high unemployment, manufacturing jobs returning to the U.S. for the first time in decades are going unfilled because American workers lack the education to handle the technology. A while ago, I visited Crenshaw High in Los Angeles and sat in on an experimental class where the students were taught to create computer games as a way of engaging them in math. The task was to compute how far they had to move a stick figure a third of the way across a screen of 360 pixels. And the majority of the class, sophomores and juniors in high school, couldn't solve the problem. I saw firsthand the reason why the World Economic Forum ranks the United States 52nd in quality of math and science education. Only 16% of students in the U.S. receive undergraduate degrees in natural sciences or engineering, contrasting with 47% in China, 38% in South Korea, and 27% in France. In engineering alone, it's even worse, with only 4% of U.S. undergraduates earning engineering degrees. Clearly, no television show can solve this problem, but we contribute in a couple of ways. First, by helping teachers. NOVA has, for many years, been the most used video resource in high school science classrooms around the country. NOVA Teachers, the educational section of our website, offers over 400 NOVA video clips, activities, and lesson plans. And we're the #1 provider of video resources to PBS Learning Media, a library of online educational tools which is free and used by more than 500,000 teachers in 70% of the country's public schools. But our goal is to go beyond students, to reach the general public with a positive message about science, scientists, and the scientific process. At a time when science is under threat from the right and the left, when the present level of funding for research is in doubt, science literacy is more important than ever. And yet, more than 40% of Americans don't know how long it takes for Earth to orbit around the sun. And 46% don't believe in evolution, the foundation of all biology and medicine. Another 40% believe that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Those are the people who spent too much time watching the Flintstones. So we at NOVA consider it the core of our mission to inspire people in a way that helps them become more engaged in science, to turn them on to the pleasure of finding things out, as the late Richard Feynman put it. Our goal is to create programs that are a blend of education and entertainment, to give our viewers something smart and something fun at the same time. One viewer wrote that NOVA is living proof that turning your brain on at the end of the day is actually more rejuvenating than turning it off. So how do we make these shows so that they're both entertaining and educational? Priority 1, tell a good story. Our ideas come from a variety of sources: our own research team, independent producers, scientists, the mainstream press, and science journals. But topics don't make stories. We're looking for the ones that have a natural storyline, a mystery to be solved, a mission to be accomplished, an obstacle to be overcome, a conflict between opposing sides with great emotional stakes. These are the ingredients of any good story, and a science story is no different. In 2005, a story fell into our lap about a controversy with the highest possible stakes: the integrity of science education itself and how evolution would be taught. With a few exceptions, evolution is universally accepted among biologists. But in a 2012 Gallup poll, 46% of Americans agreed that, quote, God created human beings pretty much in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years. Now, the number 46% has remained essentially unchanged for the past 30 years. And throughout that time, NOVA has treated evolution as any other scientific fact. We believe that by acknowledging the controversy, we would legitimize it. In retrospect, perhaps this was wishful thinking, a yearning for simplicity represented by this view of evolution.
Jump! Jump! Get up! Go, 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 get up!
So, who are these 46% of Americans who don't accept evolution? Well, many of them march in the army of the culture wars, evangelical Protestants and biblical literalists who believe that evolution contradicts the Bible. Many of us tend to deride these folks as religious nuts, Bible thumpers, and fanatics, but don't underestimate them. They are sophisticated and politically savvy. They used to base their arguments against evolution on a theory called creationism, the idea that all forms of life were created by God in just the way that the book of Genesis describes. But that was a losing argument, politically and legally. So now they've embraced another theory called intelligent design, or ID. ID purports to be a scientific theory based on the idea that some aspects of nature are simply too complex to have arisen by evolution and therefore must be the product of an intelligent designer. A few years ago, intelligent design adherents sponsored a feature documentary hosted by the actor and former New York Times columnist Ben Stein, deriding the treatment of their point of view by the scientific community and linking evolution with the Holocaust and eugenics. So here's a clip from that movie.
American officers arrive at a Nazi institution seized by First Army troops. Under the guise of an insane asylum, this has been the headquarters for the systematic murder.
So what is this place?
During the Second World War, 15,000 people were killed here.
Why were they killed?
They were killed because they were people with handicaps.
Why to kill them? What's the point of killing them?
People who were not able to work, people who were not able to live by themselves, that they were useless eaters.
Useless eaters.
And life unworthy of living. This idea grew up in the 20s. So long before National Socialism, biologists, anthropologists, they thought that maybe mankind could, or the government could interfere into the growth of the population.
I see.
And they had the utopia that they would have a society without illness and without handicap.
Alles Lebensschwache geht in der Natur unfehlbar zugrunde. Wir Menschen haben gegen dieses Gesetz der natürlichen Auslese in den letzten Jahrzehnten furchtbar gesündigt. Wir haben unwertes Leben nicht nur erhalten, wir haben ihm auch Vermehrung gewährt. Die Nachkommen dieser Kranken sahen so aus, die tiefer stehen als jedes Tier.
So this was a Darwinian concept?
Yes.
And also a Malthusian concept, very much Malthusian.
Malthusian?
Thomas Malthus, who said that there was a shortage of resources. English philosopher, so there was a shortage.
But the Nazis, they relied on Darwin.
They relied on Darwin?
Yes, Darwin and German scientists.
It's kind of a shocking clip. I always find it every time I watch it. So ever since the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, memorialized in the movie Inherit the Wind, the courts have been the primary battleground in the war on evolution, with a series of challenges to the teaching of evolution in schools based on creationism. These have consistently been rejected as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, the part of the First Amendment that says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. But in 2005, in the small town of Dover, Pennsylvania, intelligent design got into the act, and so did Nova. So here's how we set the scene for a 2-hour special called Intelligent Design, Judgment Day, Intelligent Design on Trial.
In October 2004, a war broke out in the small town of Dover, Pennsylvania.
Today, the teachers in a rural Pennsylvania town became the first in the country required to tell students that evolution is not the only theory.
It started when the Dover Area School Board passed a policy requiring that its high school science classes include a controversial subject called intelligent design. Proponents of intelligent design claim that many features of living organisms are too complex to have evolved entirely through the natural process of evolution, as Charles Darwin proposed. Instead, they claim some aspects of those organisms must have been created, fully formed, by a so-called intelligent designer. And, advocates contend, intelligent design is a bold new scientific theory with the power to overthrow the theory of evolution.
It's scientists debating science based on the evidence, not based on any religious text or authority, and it's clearly, properly the subject of a science class.
It's in fact opening the path of inquiry to new ways of thinking about things.
Evolution by natural selection is a scientific doctrine, and a critique of that doctrine is a legitimate part of science as well.
The Dover School Board demanded that science teachers read their students a one-minute statement claiming that gaps in the theory of evolution exist and putting forward intelligent design as an alternative. The statement also directed students to an intelligent design textbook called Of Pandas and People that would be made available. But many Dover residents and an overwhelming number of scientists throughout the country were outraged. They say intelligent design is nothing but religion in disguise, the latest front in the war on evolution.
The goal of intelligent design is to try to re-Christianize American society.
Intelligent design is not anywhere a scientific concept. It's not a field of science. It's not being actively researched by anyone.
It's a violation of everything we mean and everything we understand by science.
The stage was set for a battle that would pit friend against friend and neighbor against neighbor.
It was like we shot somebody's dog. I mean, there was a blow up like you couldn't believe.
It was like a civil war within the community, there's no question.
Before it was over, this battle would land the school board in federal court. No cameras were allowed in the courtroom, so to bring this historic showdown between evolution and intelligent design to light, Nova has dramatized key scenes from court transcripts. It was a 6-week trial in which modern biology was Exhibit A. And hanging in the balance was not just the Dover biology curriculum. The future of science education in America, the separation of church and state, and the very nature of scientific inquiry were all on trial.
So what caused us to depart from our normal way of handling the evolution controversy, which is to say, ignoring it? Well, it was the fact that this trial was unique. More than a debate over legal issues, it turned out to be a primer on evolution, with scientists as the main witnesses. But as you just heard, there were no cameras allowed in the courtroom, so we had no choice but to dramatize sections of the trial. Now, this involved going through thousands of pages of testimony, condensing long series of questions and answers into watchable segments while retaining the original meaning. Now, as you suspect, we had lawyers all over us, making sure that every departure from the original text was completely legit. The star witness for the prosecution, the group of parents suing the school board, was Ken Miller, a biologist from Brown University, who started out by showing how modern science has proven the validity of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. So let's see how he did it.
Darwin was convinced that species evolve over time through natural selection acting on inherited traits. But he had no idea how those traits arose, or how they were passed from generation to generation. When 20th century scientists discovered the role DNA plays in heredity, They founded a new science called genetics that put Darwin's theory to the test. Virtually every cell in every living thing contains chromosomes, which are made of densely packed strands of DNA that function as a blueprint of the individual organism's characteristics. During reproduction, chromosomes from each parent replicate and shuffle their parts to produce new chromosomes. Then each parent passes chromosomes to offspring. But the process is imperfect. Along the way, DNA is subject to random mutations or mistakes, giving each offspring its own unique blueprint. Sometimes this produces characteristics in offspring that are benign. Other times it produces harmful characteristics, like a misshapen wing. But occasionally, the process gives rise to a beneficial trait. For example, a butterfly whose coloration mimics another species that tastes bad to birds. About 100 years after Darwin proposed that natural selection acts on new traits appearing in a population, genetics revealed the biological mechanism that gives rise to those traits in the first place.
And therefore you could say that when modern genetics came into being, everything in Darwin's theory was at risk, could have been overturned if it turned out that genetics contradicted the essential elements of evolutionary theory. But it didn't contradict them. It confirmed them in great detail.
And as Miller would testify, a genetics paper published less than a year before the trial had confirmed what has long been the most inflammatory part of Darwin's theory, the common ancestry of humans and apes. That paper explored a curious discrepancy in our chromosomes. The cells of all great apes, like chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, contain 24 pairs of chromosomes. If humans share a common ancestor with apes, you'd expect us to have the same number. But surprisingly, human cells contain only 23 pairs.
The question is, if evolution is right about this common ancestry idea, where'd the chromosome go? Well, evolution makes a testable prediction. And that is that somewhere in the human genome, we ought to be able to find a piece of Scotch tape holding two chromosomes together, so that our 24 pairs, 2 of them were pasted together to form just 23. And if we can't find that, then the hypothesis of common ancestry is wrong and evolution is mistaken. Next slide.
To solve this riddle for the court, Miller would show how scientists discovered traces of our evolutionary past buried in the very structure of a chromosome carried by all humans. Typically, on the ends of every chromosome, you should find special genetic markers, or sequences of DNA, called telomeres. And in their middles, you should find different genetic markers called centromeres. But if a mutation occurred in the past, causing 2 pairs of chromosomes to fuse, we should find evidence in those genetic markers. Telomeres not only at the ends of the new chromosome, but also at their middles, and not 1, but 2 centromeres. Finding a structure like this in our chromosomes would explain why humans have 1 pair fewer than the great apes.
And if we don't find that, then evolution is in trouble. Next slide. Lo and behold, the answer is in chromosome number 2. All of the marks of the fusion of those chromosomes predicted by common descent and evolution, all those marks are present on human chromosome number 2. So the case is closed in a most beautiful way. And that is, the prediction of evolution of common ancestry is fulfilled by that lead pipe evidence that you see here, in terms of tying everything together. That our chromosome, formed by the fusion from our common ancestor, is chromosome number 2. Evolution has made a testable prediction, and it has passed.
So, modern genetics and molecular biology actually support evolutionary theory?
They support it in great detail. And the closer we can get to looking at the details of the human genome, the more powerful that evidence has become.
So to make its case, that's a pretty study, isn't it? That's amazing. To make its case, the defense listed 8 expert witnesses, including 5 from the Discovery Institute, a very well-funded Seattle organization that promotes intelligent design. But 5 of those witnesses never testified with no explanation, nor would they speak to us despite multiple requests. The main strategy of the defense was to show that intelligent design presented a credible scientific, not religious alternative, thus escaping the burden of the Establishment Clause. To do this, the defense counted on its star witness, Michael Behe from Lehigh University, author of dozens of papers unrelated to intelligent design. Behe also refused to grant us an interview, but he did go on record in the trial. So let's see how that worked out.
Dr. Behe, what is your profession?
I am a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
And you're a biochemist?
And that's correct, yes.
How long have you taught at the college level?
For 23 years.
Sir, what is intelligent design?
Intelligent design is a scientific theory that proposes that some aspects of life are best explained as the result of design, and that the strong appearance of design in life is real and not just apparent.
Is intelligent design based on any religious beliefs or convictions?
No, it isn't.
What is it based on?
It is based entirely on observable, empirical, physical evidence from nature, plus logical inferences.
Now, when you use the term design, what do you mean?
I think the best, well, the most visually striking example of design is something called the bacterial flagellum. Now, this is a figure of a bacterial flagellum taken from a textbook, which is widely used in colleges and universities around the country. The bacterial flagellum is quite literally an outboard motor that bacteria use to swim. And in order to accomplish that function, it has a number of parts which are ordered to that effect. Now, this part here, which is labeled filament, is actually the propeller of the bacterial flagellum. The motor is actually a rotary motor. And most people who see this and have the function explained to them quickly realize that these parts are ordered for a purpose and therefore bespeak design.
Under the microscope, bacteria powered by flagella seem almost acrobatic. They tumble, corkscrew, and pirouette, thanks to that whip-like filament. Driving this propeller is a tiny motor, part of a complex structure made of about 40 different kinds of proteins. And according to Behe, if any one of these parts is missing from the system, the motor can't function. Behe calls systems like this irreducibly complex, a term he coined. And he argues such systems could not have evolved naturally.
Have other scientists acknowledged these design features of the flagellum?
Yes, they have. If you could advance to the next slide. In 1998, a man named David DeRosier wrote an article in the journal Cell, which is a very prestigious scientific journal, entitled "The Turn of the Screw, the Bacterial Flagellar Motor." Now, David DeRosier is a professor of biology at Brandeis University in Massachusetts and has worked on the bacterial flagellar motor for most of his career. Now, in that article, he makes a statement, quote, "More so than other motors, the flagellum resembles a machine designed by a human," close quote. So David DeRosier also recognizes that the structure of the flagellum appears designed.
What I wrote was, this is a machine that looks like it was designed by a human, but that doesn't mean it was designed. That is the product of intelligent design. Indeed, this more has all the earmarks of something that arose by evolution.
Using an electron microscope, DeRosier produces ghostly pictures like this one, revealing the inner workings of what's been called the world's most efficient motor.
This is the drive shaft. This transmits this torque generated by the motor. That would then turn the propeller, which would push the bacterial cell through the fluid.
Michael Behe has argued that the flagellum could not have evolved, since its parts have no function for natural selection to act on until they are fully assembled. But evidence that refutes Behe's claim of irreducible complexity comes from a tiny syringe that injects poison, found in some of the nastiest of all bacteria.
This is a structure found, for example, in Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes the bubonic plague. And look at the similarities. Now, this structure doesn't rotate, but it still has to extend this structure, which is equivalent to the rod, the drive shaft here. It has to extend that because it needs this little channel. It's like sort of like a syringe. So the virulence factors that are made inside the cell, which is down here, can be exported, pushed up into this hole, and exported out through this long kind of needle, perhaps into a cell in your body or mine, and thereby create misery.
And it turns out the two structures look similar for a reason. The syringe on the right is made of a subset of the very same protein types found in the base of the flagellum on the left. Though the syringe is missing proteins found in the motor and therefore cannot produce rotary motion, it functions perfectly as an apparatus for transmitting disease.
So if we think about what it means to be irreducibly complex, the argument is that if you take away even one of these proteins, that the structure cannot function. And yet here is a structure that functions, that is missing several of the proteins, and yet here it is, a working viable organelle of the bacterium. So indeed, this structure is not, in that sense, irreducibly complex.
So if that weren't enough, Ken Miller had an apt metaphor to put the irreducible complexity argument out of its misery once and for all.
To emphasize de Rosier's point, Miller arrived at court making an unusual fashion statement.
As an example of what irreducible complexity means, advocates of intelligent design like to point to a very common machine, the mousetrap. And the mousetrap is composed of 5 parts. It has a base plate, the catch, a spring, a little hammer that actually does the dirty work, and a bait holder. The mousetrap will not work if any one of these 5 parts are taken away. That's absolutely true. But remember the key notion of irreducible complexity, and that is that this whole machine is completely useless until all the parts are in place. Well, that turns out not to be true. And I'll give you an example. What I have right here is a mousetrap from which I've removed 2 of the 5 parts. I still have the base plate, the spring, and the hammer. Now, you can't catch any mice with this, so it's not a very good mousetrap. But it turns out that despite the missing parts, it makes a perfectly good, if somewhat inelegant, tie clip. And when we look at the favorite examples for irreducible complexity, and the bacterial flagellum is a perfect example, we find the molecular equivalent of my tie clip, which is we see parts of the machine missing 2, 3, 4, maybe even 20 parts, but still fulfilling a perfectly good purpose that could be favored by evolution. And that's why the irreducible complexity argument falls apart.
Now, to make a program about a controversy when one side gives you full and enthusiastic access and the other none at all is difficult, because no matter how legitimate your effort to give both sides a hearing, there's a risk of appearing unfair. And in this case, that was compounded by the fact that the arguments that the defense witnesses presented were just so weak. But the wild card in this case was always the judge, John Jones III, a Republican recommended by then-Senator Rick Santorum and nominated by George Bush. Highly intelligent but untutored in science, Judge Jones decided for the prosecution in a landmark ruling that has yet to be challenged. This program was very successful for NOVA with great viewership and buzz, and teachers all over the country use it along with the educational materials that we develop. Here's my favorite letter from a student at Ohio State whose professor showed the program in class. I'm a 30-year-old active duty Marine. I was raised in a really firm Christian home. Revolution was not even considered an option or a possibility. Your film made me realize how ignorant people really are with regard to science, including myself. Evolution and religion can both exist together. I never would have believed I could come around to this way of thinking. I feel as though a light went off and everything you've been talking about fell into place. Now that was remarkably rewarding. It was not the only letter we received testifying to the impact of our program. We've now gone back to our old practice of treating evolution like any other scientific fact. Yet the controversy continues, bitter as ever. And if, in a few years, the need arose to make another program of this type, I'd be dismayed, but I wouldn't be surprised. And now, I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes, over here.
Thank you for coming today. I'm curious if in any of these arguments, the point is brought up when you don't believe in evolution because you can't believe in evolution, and what the response would be to that.
Explain. I don't.
Oh, the idea that believing in God. The idea that believing in God, believing in the Bible as a literal, precludes believing that evolution could possibly happen, and therefore, for these people, there's no choice in the matter. I'm wondering if that kind of argument comes up. And how it's handled.
Well, I think that is underlying the argument that all biblical literalists and evangelicals make. They can't believe in evolution because they definitely believe that, that their religion and their belief in God precludes evolution. Now, the reality is, of course, that all mainstream religions accept evolution. No issue. Catholicism, almost all non-evangelical Protestant churches, and certainly my own religion, Judaism, completely accepts evolution. It is definitely the most ultra-conservative wings of religion that don't accept it. So yes, that argument comes up all the time, and you know, no matter how much evidence you show them, it's very difficult to get them to move to it because they believe that evolution is a threat to them. Now, the ironic thing is that Dover, Pennsylvania is a very religious town. There are, like, for 11,000 people, there are like 25 churches. I mean, it's very religious. And the vast majority of people of the parents who brought the case against the school boards are themselves religious. They teach Sunday school, their parents are ministers, they are ministers themselves. I mean, I've never seen such a religious place. However, they are able to, as biology teachers, and many of them were biology teachers, they knew that the scientific evidence dictated one way of thinking, that is evolution, and they were offended that anyone would ask them to teach something that they knew to be patently false to children in the school. So that was the amazing thing about Dover. You weren't talking about a group of non-religious or atheist people who were against. They were all religious, every one of them. And we have scenes in the film, which, by the way, if you want to see the whole film, you can go to pbs.org/nova/intelligent design, and you can see it. And you'll see scenes of the people who were, that some of the people who brought the case against the school board teaching Sunday school. I mean, that's what they do there. So, you know, that was kind of a really interesting, ironic twist. And it's very sad how that case really kind of destroyed that town. It's awful. Yes, over here.
Is this on? Earlier in your presentation, and I think maybe it was in your mission clip, there was a statement about how that, we have shows about doctors, lawyers, there was something, oh, politicians, maybe it was, but not about scientists. And I wanted to ask, first of all, it's sort of a two-part question. First of all, has there been an attempt, either a proposal or even a pilot, to bring a fictionalized show about a scientist, not just a practicing doctor or something, but somebody doing research, to television? And two, if you could dramatize one type of scientist for television, what would you pick?
Well, it's, I think the bane of our existence in PBS is always money. I spend, I'd say, probably about a third of my time trying to raise money to support shows like this. And this show was actually, we would not have been able to do it had we not had an outside funder. And that outside funder was Vulcan Productions, led by Paula Apsell, who was one of the founders of Microsoft. So, money is always a limiting factor. I personally am actually, for 6 years, I've been working on a feature film on Lisa Meitner, who was actually the first female full professor in Germany. She was a professor of physics. She worked with Einstein and Planck and Bohr and all of those great mid-20th century physicists. And she didn't really, she was what they call the mother of nuclear fission. She was the one who figured out that the atom had actually been split, but she was denied the Nobel Prize because Otto Hahn, who received it, she had to flee Germany because her origins were Jewish, and she lived in Sweden, and he took the Nobel Prize along with another male scientist and denied it to Lisa Meitner. One of those stories which are all too common. So yes, I think that, but ironically, and I think that's why we were interested in her as a character, is because she's just driven by a passion for finding things out. That's actually all she cared about. She didn't really care that much about the Nobel Prize. She cared that Otto Hahn became an apologist for the scientists in Germany during World War II, but she didn't really care about prizes and awards. She just cared about understanding nature. So yes, there is a play about Rosalind Franklin, who was one of the people whose X-ray crystallography pictures formed the basis of Watson and Crick's elucidation of the structure of DNA. Another woman who was denied the Nobel Prize, but unfortunately she had passed away by that time from radiation-induced cancer because she worked with X-rays so much. So yeah, and there are fictionalized works about Marie Curie, who was another great scientist who was villainized because she had a love affair. And so, yeah, there are great stories about both female and male scientists, and I wish that we could bring them more to the screen. We do sometimes. The National Science Foundation funded a series called Lives of Science that we did. We did Galileo, and we did Newton, and Einstein, and an African-American scientist called Percy Julian, who was a great scientist, the second African-American admitted to the National Academy of Sciences. It's a great story. Again, you can see it on pbs.org/nova/Percy Julian. So I think these are great and inspiring stories, and I wish we could do them more. And of course, we've done Richard Feynman innumerable times. Yes, here.
You mentioned this morning that as well as the right and left, is the science as well. Who is this left, and what is the basis of their argument?
Well, have you heard of Jane McCarthy and the war against vaccine? I call that anti-science, and I personally believe, I went to Brandeis, and I was there during the 60s, and I think that there is an underlying antagonism toward technology on left-wing politics in the United States, but it's come out most prominently in the anti-vaccine movement, which I personally think is one of the more disgusting, because these people expect us to vaccinate our children to provide the herd immunity and the protection that their children will get without taking any risk, if there actually is any risk, which I don't think there's much.
What is the basis of their resistance? These are examples
Well,
What is the basis of their thinking?
I think the basis of their thinking is, you know, I think personally we want to live risk-free lives. I mean, we can't even have playgrounds anymore for our kids to play in, you know? Who lets their kids go out to play anymore? We don't believe in any risk at all. I think you see that in the extremes of the environmental movement as well. No risk, no substance, and of course, that's impossible. So I think that's the basis of it. It's also, you know, a misunderstanding and an inability to analyze scientific data because they never learned how to do it because they didn't take enough science and because we don't teach it well enough. I mean, to me, as far as vaccines, we're actually making a film on this called Jabbed. The record on vaccines is very clear that the link between vaccines and autism was based on fraudulent evidence, but somehow, you know what they say is that the paper always gets great publicity, the retraction never does. So I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Can I take any more? Oh, yeah.
Along the same lines with the vaccine, the GMO controversy.
Absolutely.
Producing anything with that yet, or getting ready to get into the controversy yet?
Absolutely, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. I mean, I've been making films on recombinant DNA since 1978 with Graham Chedden. I made the first one called The Gene Engineers. When the scientists themselves came up with, here are the things that we're worried about. And none of those things have really ever really materialized. And this whole European, you know, hysteria over GMOs to me is idiotic, but that's my opinion. What do I know?
In the secular community, we are strong supporters of science education, but when it comes to reciprocation, a lot of times we get the message, well, it isn't our primary message to bash religion, let's not offend people. And of course that's understandable. But we don't spend all our time bashing religion. Sometimes we just want less prejudice, more tolerance. Do you think that there are issues that we can work on with the science community, and what are they, beyond, of course, your issues, which of course we do support?
Well, you know, I think that many scientists would find themselves, you know, in agreement with you. So, you know, I'm not quite sure I understood your question, but yeah, I mean, I think it's very important, and that many groups need to work together to strengthen not only science education, but the basis of it, which is rational thought. I mean, you asked about vaccines, GMOs. There is an absence there of rational thought. We all have fears. It's kind of in our psychology, but this desire to be risk-free, to me, is just irrational. It's impossible. And that's the way it goes. Yes, some children, a very small number, will be injured by vaccines. That's the reality. And but to me, you know, we are such poor assessors of risk, but you gotta encourage people to kind of back away from the emotional fear-filled part of ourselves and toward the rational part of ourselves. Or I don't know how our society is going to survive, because if we're risk-free, what are we going to be doing? We'll all be living in caves, and that certainly must have risks. Over here.
One of the basic flaws of the intelligent design arguments is that the word intelligence is not well defined. There's no common agreed on definition of what intelligence is. In some sense, in simple terms, the best definition of intelligence is that you know it when you see it. And creationists think that they see intelligence when they see the wonders of nature, and you have so convincingly shown that that's not a valid argument. There is no intelligence in the human sense or human sense needed for evolution. However, there is another argument against intelligence design that I'd be interested in asking you if that can or have been explored. And it flows out of the research on artificial intelligence. in artificial intelligence, it's shown that random search, in some sense, is one of the most general methods to achieve solutions to problems that may very well be perceived as intelligent solutions.
Well, if you, we made a program called, and you saw a little clip of it in our mission reel, called Smartest Machine on Earth, which was about IBM's effort to create a machine that could win at Jeopardy. And I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, there's a good explanation of something like what you're talking about in machine learning, which is the idea that you, I mean, one philosophy is you give a computer principles by which they can, say, recognize a letter A. The other one, which was adopted in this very brilliant program, was that you just show them, the machine, every possible kind of letter A, and then somehow, and I think people do say somehow, it will derive the principle and be able to recognize an A that's unfamiliar to it. So I think that is a very interesting perspective that was brought out in that question. Sir, down here.
I have a loud voice, but I'm a teacher. We use your the website all the time. It's fantastic. Recently in Worcester, where I live, they just started a science cafe with Nova Science Now. It's kind of a partnership, and they bring scientists in to give a talk on what they're doing. And I was just wondering if that's just a pilot or just a name association, or if that's something that Nova is trying to do more of, getting into the communities, promoting science from within rather than just on TV. I know a lot of people that would prefer to learn firsthand, one-on-one, and I didn't know if that's something that you guys are actively pursuing, or if that's just an offshoot, something on the side.
The National Science Foundation has done a fantastic job of stimulating science cafes. And so when we've gotten grants from NSF, they, for example, for Nova Science Now, which unfortunately is no longer funded. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get it funded again sometime. And now for Making Stuff, which is a series we do on material science with David Pogue, and it will be on again in October. They also give us money to support the Science Cafe movement. So we're kind of the organizer of it right now. I don't know how long that'll last. Unfortunately, and you may not know this, the NSF is kind of abandoning, maybe that's too strong a word, but it's certainly decreasing its commitment to what's known as informal science education, which is the work that we do in media and also what you find in museums. And that is disastrous. I happen to be a great believer in, I mean, science education in school is crucial, but if you don't create a fertile environment for these kids to be accepting of science, it's going to be much harder to teach them. I think you probably agree. This society there's a lot of anti-science and fear of science in this society, and that's what I see programs like NOVA doing year after year after year. So I'm hoping that NSF will come to its senses. It's very dismaying to us, but that's what supported the Science Cafe movement, and I'm glad you really enjoy it. And science cafes, you should look around. We have them in pubs and cafes. We try to, put them in informal places where people won't feel threatened by them. So, and I think they're a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
People love them. Yes. Oh, one more question, Seth? Okay. One more over here.
Well, first, thanks for all you do. Being the candle in the dark, that one show that I can go to while I watch TLC rock. Anyway, talking about accepting of the science, and I'm glad you get letters of appreciation. I'm wondering if you get any letters of desperation from either teachers or faculty or administration people that have meet resistance, either administrators who meet resistance from teachers who don't want to adopt any of your materials, or vice versa.
No, we don't usually get letters from teachers who don't want to adopt our materials, but you know, we certainly get letters from teachers who really don't feel that they have the resources to teach with, and they're very grateful for our video clips because they're free. And PBS Learning Media, which just has hundreds of them, it's free. And if you compare that, for example, to United Streaming from Discovery, which charges school systems a great deal of money every month to use it. And ours were all standards-based, and they're checked with experts, and they're accurate. So we do get lots of letters, and we do try to communicate with teachers. And if there are other teachers here, I really urge you to go to pbs.org/Nova and go on the teacher section and sign up. We have a website, we have a whole Facebook site for teachers to really tell us what it is that they need and how we can help them more. So we have a great communication with teachers. They're among our best viewers and fans, so that's very important to us. Okay, Seth, thank you. This is